Blessings of the Triple Gem, Theruwan Saranai. Today we'll be looking at the Vammika Sutta, which is the simile of the anthill. This is from Majjhima Nikāya, discourse number 23. Let's begin by paying respects to the Triple Gem. We can bow our heads in Anjali. Homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dhamma, and homage to the Noble Sangha. Let's have a quick look at what we'll cover in this session. So we'll look at tips and reminders, so how to get the best out of this session. We'll then have an overview of the Vammika Sutta to set the scene. So we'll look at the sutta architecture and give a general overview of the sutta. Then we'll look at who is Venerable Kumārakassapa. It's important because he's the central figure in this discourse. And we know that he received the riddle and went on to liberate himself using it after being instructed by the Buddha on its meaning. We'll then read out the deity's riddle for Venerable Kumārakassapa and then deep dive into the Buddha's explanation on how to understand the meaning of the deity's riddle. And after we do that, we'll summarize how to contemplate or meditate on the Buddha's words towards complete liberation. And we'll close the session by sharing the merit and blessings. So how to get the best out of this session? As we usually say, it's good to keep an open mind, be open to the Buddha's words in this discourse and the instructions for today's meditation. Be okay with not understanding everything. Whatever you understand and are able to practice in this session, take into your mind. Maybe that is what is needed right now. And the rest will come later with further practice and further understanding. It's good to remember that we are all learners. We're here to lean on each other, to make effort, to make progress towards developing the Noble Eightfold Path. And we are definitely walking this path together. In terms of the meditation, it's good to apply yourself to the meditation, really give yourself the opportunity to turn the Dhamma in your mind during this session, not just listening, but also connecting with the Dhamma. So we often say use your own examples to connect with the Dhamma. And this is because the Buddha's teaching is a wisdom pathway. We need to see the Dhamma directly for ourselves. So when we apply our own examples and gain direct insight, that's when we see the Dhamma. And when we see the Dhamma, we see the Buddha and vice versa. And lastly, let's have good wishes for everyone. Good wishes, kind thoughts, gratitude for anyone who has helped us on the spiritual path right up until this point. Let's now look at the architecture of the Vammika Sutta. It's quite a straightforward discourse in terms of how it progresses. The challenge in the discourse is actually in understanding the Buddha's explanation of the meaning of the riddle and knowing how to contemplate it as a sutta meditation. So the first part of the discourse begins with Venerable Kumārakassapa. He's residing at Blindsman's Grove and he's approached by a deity who he has a past life connection with. The second part is where the deity utters a 15-part riddle to Venerable Kumārakassapa and then advises him to ask the Buddha about the meaning of the riddle in order to decode it and be able to practice it towards liberation. So the deity has actually come to help him. And then the third part is Venerable Kumārakassapa going to see the Buddha and asking about this riddle, and then the Buddha actually teaching him the meaning of the riddle. And then the fourth part is Venerable Kumārakassapa retiring into seclusion in this blind man's grove, and here he contemplates the riddle, and not long after he's able to attain arahantship. He has realized nibbāna. So this Vammika Sutta, as we shall see, is quite a unique discourse or sutta. Firstly, it provides a wonderful example of the connection that is possible with noble beings in the pure abodes, the Suddhavasa. In Vammika Sutta, we see a non-returner, Brahma, come to help Venerable Kumārakassapa. So this is who we call the deity. And he's actually coming to help because he knows that Venerable Kumārakassapa's goal is nibbāna and he wants to help him to realize nibbāna. And they were connected through past births during the time of Kassapa Buddha. They were part of a group of monks that went and practiced ascetic practices in accordance with Kassapa Buddha's teachings on the side of a mountain. So in any case, the fact that a deity has come from the pure abodes to help, we can infer even today, if we have that connection or we have gratitude and respect for these noble beings in the pure abodes, then it is possible to be assisted in a similar way to develop the Noble Eightfold Path and penetrate Buddha Dhamma. Likewise, if we attain path and fruit of non-return and are reborn to the pure abodes, it may be possible for us to help those connected to us in this birth, in the future. We know from the suttas, for example, the Samaya Sutta in Digha Nikaya Discourse number 20, the gathering of the mighty devas, or the mighty gathering of the devas, that noble beings from the pure abodes do go to different realms of existence. So this is something to reflect upon or bear in mind. The second thing is how this teaching of the Vammika Sutta really demonstrates the perfect wisdom of the Buddha. And this is confirmed by the deity's words after he's recited the riddle, when he advised Venerable Kumārakassapa to seek out the Buddha to understand its meaning, which he does. And as a result of being easy to instruct, so we know this as the metta quality of Suvacha, and we know this from the Anumana Sutta, that Venerable Kumārakassapa is willing to follow the Buddha's instruction and not neglect the practice. So he was able to realize Nibbana after a very short time. And it is yet another example that if we correctly contemplate by following the Buddha's instructions, we follow the wisdom or insight pathway, then it is possible to gradually train, gradually practice, and gradually make progress towards complete liberation. This, in fact, reminds us of the Buddha's words in the Kevatta Sutta, Digha Nikaya Discourse number 11, where he responded to the householder Kevatta, who was asking him to perform superhuman feats and miracles. And in response, the Buddha gives a teaching on 3 kinds of miracles: the miracle of psychic power, the miracle of telepathy, and the miracle of instruction. And the Buddha explained to householder Kevatta the danger of the miracle of psychic power and the miracle of telepathy, because they can be challenged by skeptics and lead to unfortunate results. And because of this, the Buddha disliked, rejected, and despised raising the power or prestige of these 2 kinds of miracles. Instead, the Buddha praised the miracle of instruction, because he was saying that these teachings or instruction lead to the most wonderful results, which is ultimately Nibbana. When we learn these sutta meditations, we are following the Buddha's miracle of instruction. So we can expect to realize the wonderful results at some point after making effort to develop the Noble Eightfold Path, so that this Dhamma can be penetrated. Now, when we look at this Vammika Sutta today, we will be drawing on some of our previous sutta meditations to help us to do this meditation. As the Buddha has stated, gradual training, gradual practice, gradual progress. So we are building on what we have developed before, those previous meditations, and applying them in a different way. And the insight we have realized from them as well. And we're going to apply it to what we're learning. So this gradually helps us towards realizing Nibbana. We're chipping away at it. So that's what we're going to do today by learning the Vammika Sutta. Now, there's a separate talk on Venerable Kumārakassapa in our Who Are Our Role Models series of talks. And that goes into more detail on his birth, his past births, his accomplishments and ability. And if you're interested in learning more about this noble disciple of the Buddha, looking for some inspiration, then you can check out that recently published talk. Now, I'll quickly run through some of the highlights here, as it's helpful to know a little bit more about him if you don't know already, because he's the central figure in this discourse. So he was the son of a woman who became a bhikkhuni while unaware that she was already pregnant with him. And there was a controversy regarding her pregnancy, and that was investigated and resolved, and she was declared a clean bhikkhuni. When he was born, King Pasenadi of Kosala brought him up like a prince, and the Buddha referred to him as Kumārakassapa, or boy Kumara. He took novice ordination at a very young age, so this was at the age of 7, and then full ordination at the age of 20. And then later on, as we shall see in this particular sutta, a deity came and gave him a riddle. He went to the Buddha explained its meaning and gave some instruction how to contemplate it. And then thereafter, after a short time, he attained arahantship using this teaching as his subject of meditation. He was designated by the Buddha as foremost among the monk disciples with variegated or eloquent speech, so citta katikana in Pali. And this was because he adorned his Dhamma talks with many similes, parables, and reasoning. And he also was able to later on help his mother, the bhikkhuni, to go towards Nibbana as well, to help her remove some of the blocks. So he's a very noble disciple that we can look up to, venerate, and honor. So now that we've laid a bit of a foundation, let's begin our study of the Vammika Sutta. It begins, "Thus have I heard. On one occasion, the Blessed One was living at Savatthi in Jetha's Grove, Anathapindika's park. Now on that occasion, the Venerable Kumārakassapa was living in the blind men's grove. Then, when the night was well advanced, a certain deity of beautiful appearance who illuminated the whole of blind men's grove approached the Venerable Kumārakassapa and stood at one side. So standing, the deity said to him, 'Bhikkhu, bhikkhu, this ant hill fumes by night and flames by day. Thus spoke the Brahmin, delve with the knife, thou wise one.' Delving with the knife, the wise one saw a bar. 'A bar, O venerable sir.' Thus spoke the Brahmin, throw out the bar, delve with the knife, thou wise one. Delving with the knife, the wise one saw a toad. 'A toad, O venerable sir.' Thus spoke the Brahmin, throw out the toad, delve with the knife, thou wise one. Delving with the knife, the wise one saw a fork. 'A fork, O venerable sir.' Thus spoke the Brahmin, throw out the fork, delve with the knife, thou wise one. Delving with the knife, the wise one saw a sieve. 'A sieve, O venerable sir.' Thus spoke the Brahmin, throw out the sieve, delve with the knife, thou wise one. Delving with the knife, the wise one saw a tortoise. 'A tortoise, O venerable sir.' Thus spoke the Brahmin, throw out the tortoise, delve with the knife, thou wise one. Delving with the knife, the wise one saw a butcher's knife and block. 'A butcher's knife and block, O venerable sir.' Thus spoke the Brahmin, throw out the butcher's knife and block, delve with the knife, thou wise one. Delving with the knife, the wise one saw a piece of meat. 'A piece of meat, O venerable sir.' Thus spoke the Brahmin, throw out the piece of meat, delve with the knife, thou wise one. Delving with the knife, the wise one saw a naga serpent. 'A naga serpent, O venerable sir.' Thus spoke the Brahmin, leave the naga serpent, do not harm the naga serpent, honor the naga serpent. So that was the riddle. Now, when you know the meaning of the riddle, it actually feels like you're speaking with the Buddha and the Buddha is actually telling you what to do at every step. And it's actually very, very heartfelt, like when you read it out and you actually know the meaning. But anyway, when we first hear the riddle, so this is not that we understand it yet, but when we first hear the riddle, it actually doesn't make sense to us, does it? Yes, there's plenty of imagery in this riddle, and if we take it literally, it doesn't make sense. So we need some kind of key for these references in the riddle. Otherwise, we can't derive the meaning ourselves. So it's good that the noble being then gives the following advice to Venerable Kumārakassapa. Bhikkhu, you should go to the Blessed One and ask him about this riddle. And the Blessed One tells you, so should you remember it. Bhikkhu, other than the Tathagata or a disciple of the Tathagata or one who has learned it from them, I see no one in this world with its gods, its maras, and its brahmas, in this generation with its recluses and brahmins, its princes and its people whose explanation of this riddle might satisfy the mind. That is what was said by the deity, who thereupon vanished at once. So we see here that this noble being knows that only a Buddha, the Tathagata, can explain the riddle so we can contemplate it. And then he also includes a disciple of the Tathagata, meaning someone who's been taught by him, also someone who has learned it from them. And then when you think about it this way, you actually can connect this with another sutta that we've heard before, which is the Sammasambuddha Sutta. And the reason why we connect it is because what the deity is really saying is that the Tathagata is the one who originates the path. So if I just read out the paragraph from that sutta, it makes sense. The Tathagata Bhikkhus, the Arahant, the perfectly enlightened one, is the originator of the path, unarisen before. the producer of the path, unproduced before, the declarer of the path, undeclared before. He is the knower of the path, the discoverer of the path, the one skilled in the path, and his disciples now dwell following that path and become possessed of it afterwards. So this is the distinction and disparity and difference between the Buddha versus everybody else. And so that is why when the deity says, go and ask the Buddha, he's giving something very important to him. He's not saying, think about it yourself, make it up yourself, and then go and teach other people what you think it means. He's actually saying, go to the source for it. And so we would also stand in good measure to do that often when we're encountered with certain things, to actually go back to what the Buddha said, go back to what he means and has explained. So we always realize good results if we listen, memorize, practice, and penetrate what the Buddha has taught. So Venerable Kumārakassapa, being someone with the quality of being easy to instruct, takes the noble being's advice, which is wonderful, so he goes and sees the Buddha. Now, if he was difficult to instruct, so that this in Pali means duvacha, he would have ignored the noble being's advice. He might have tried to figure it out himself and probably fallen short of the meaning. And if he had done that and gone to teach other people, then it would have been quite a mess. So it's a very good thing to know that Venerable Kumārakassapa is the type of noble disciple who is with that good quality of being suvacha. So the discourse says, then when the night was over, Venerable Kumārakassapa went to the Blessed One. After paying homage to him, he sat down at one side and told the Blessed One what had occurred. Then he asked, Venerable Sir, what is the anthill? What the fuming by night? What the flaming by day? Who is the Brahmin? Who the wise one? What is the knife? What the delving? What the bar? What the toad? What the fork? What the sieve? What the tortoise? What the butcher's knife and block? What the piece of meat? What the naga serpent? So these are the same kinds of questions we would have asked after hearing the riddle. Only by knowing what they represent can we unlock the meaning. So I'm going to read out the Buddha's complete response in full. And then after that, we'll deep dive into each part of the riddle step by step so we can see how to do this sutta meditation. So the Buddha says, Bhikkhu, the anthill is a symbol for this body, made of a material form consisting of the four great elements, procreated by a mother and father, built up out of boiled rice and porridge, and subject to impermanence, to being worn and rubbed away, to dissolution and disintegration. What one thinks and ponders by night, based upon one's actions during the day, is the fuming by night. The actions one undertakes during the day by body, speech, and mind, after thinking and pondering by night, is the flaming by day. The Brahman is the symbol for the Tathagata, accomplished and fully enlightened. The wise one is a symbol for a bhikkhu, one in higher training. The knife is a symbol for noble wisdom. The delving is a symbol for the arousing of energy. The bar is a symbol for ignorance. Throughout the bar, abandon ignorance, delve with the knife, thou wise one. This is the meaning. The toad is a symbol for anger and irritation. Throughout the toad, abandon anger and irritation, delve with the knife, thou wise one. This is the meaning. The fork is a symbol for doubt. Throughout the fork, abandon doubt. Delve with the knife, thou wise one. This is the meaning. The sieve is a symbol for the 5 hindrances, namely the hindrance of sensual desire, the hindrance of ill will, the hindrance of sloth and torpor, the hindrance of restlessness and remorse, or restlessness and worry, and the hindrance of doubt. Throughout the sieve, abandon the 5 hindrances. Delve with the knife, thou wise one. This is the meaning. The tortoise is a symbol for the 5 aggregates affected by clinging, namely the material form aggregate affected by clinging, the feeling aggregate affected by clinging, the perception aggregate affected by clinging, the formations aggregate affected by clinging, and the consciousness aggregate affected by clinging. Throughout the tortoise, abandon the 5 aggregates affected by clinging. Delve with the knife, thou wise one. This is the meaning. The butcher's knife and block is a symbol for the 5 chords of sensual pleasure, forms cognizable by the eye that are wished for, desired, agreeable, and likable, connected with sensual desire and provocative of lust. And then it goes on, sounds cognizable by the ear, odors cognizable by the nose, flavors cognizable by the tongue, tangibles cognizable by the body that are wished for, desired, agreeable, and likable, connected with sensual desire and provocative of lust. Throughout the butcher's knife and block, abandon the 5 cords of sensual pleasure. Delve with the knife, thou wise one. This is the meaning. The piece of meat is a symbol for delight and lust. Throughout the piece of meat, abandon delight and lust. Delve with the knife, thou wise one. This is the meaning. The Naga serpent is a symbol for a bhikkhu who has destroyed the taints. Leave the Naga serpent. Do not harm the Naga serpent. Honor the Naga serpent. This is the meaning. This is what the Blessed One said. The Venerable Kumārakassapa was satisfied and delighted in the Blessed One's word. So afterwards, we know Venerable Kumārakassapa went back to Blind Men's Grove and contemplated this. He aroused energy and penetrated this Dhamma and realized Nibbana. So it's a very good reason to understand and contemplate this riddle when you know that the fruit of doing so and penetrating the Dhamma is actually the fruit of arahantship. So we can now deep dive into how we build this sutta meditation. And it's important to recognize that each step has deep Dhamma behind it, things we have covered in other meditations that we will apply. And we're also going to keep applying wisdom all the way through. And this will become clearer when we deep dive into each part. And this is yet another example of the Buddha teaching us that these wisdom pathways or insight pathways really do culminate in the realization of complete liberation. The Dhamma gets more refined as we go through the steps because we are literally removing each and every obstruction that we come across in developing the Noble Eightfold Path. And this includes wrong views and things that are polluting the mind. So this is a very profound sutta meditation, and we should count ourselves very fortunate to have even the slightest inclination towards learning it and then practicing it. So let's start with the anthill. So this is Vammika in Pali. And if you remember, the riddle says, the anthill fumes by night and flames by day. And so this part, the Buddha explains, Bhikkhu, the anthill is a symbol for this body made up of material form consisting of the 4 great elements procreated by a mother and father built out of boiled rice and porridge and subject to impermanence, to being worn and rubbed away, to dissolution and disintegration. So the 4 great elements are what makes up this material form, or physical nutriment. And the Buddha is reminding us that although we are conceived by our parents and they nourish us with food, and we are still subject to impermanence, we don't last. So this collection of 4 great elements does not last. The Buddha has pointed out that it's not a good idea to take refuge to foster this wrong view of what is comprised of the 4 great elements. It's not a safe bet and can only endanger us. And we have contemplated the 4 great elements before when we looked at the Dhatu Vibhanga Sutta. So this was the exposition of the elements, Majjhima Nikaya discourse number 140. And also in our meditation on the profitable path based on the 4-line verse spoken by the Buddha in reference to Chunda, who offered the last meal before the Buddha attained parinibbana. So knowing that this body is like an anthill that is made up of the earth element, water element, air or wind element, and fire element, we need to contemplate each of the elements as not me and mine. As it says in the Dhatu Vibhanga Sutta, that each element we need to contemplate both internally and externally that they are simply those elements. In this way, it enables us to see, as it actually is with proper wisdom, this is not mine, I am not this, and this is not myself. When we see it as it actually is with proper wisdom, it's only then that we become disenchanted with the 4 great elements. And it makes the mind turn away or have dispassion towards them. So we take examples for each of the earth element, water element, wind element, and fire element to actually do this. So for example, the earth element, we could take the hair on the head, and if we see hair on a plate of food we are served at the restaurant, we think, do we take that hair in the plate of food as me and mine? And of course we don't. So externally, that is not me and mine. So why do we take the hair on our head that we consider internal as me and mine? So you keep doing the contemplation until you see both internal and external earth element as not me and mine, as many examples as it takes. If you do it successfully, then you have that determination for wisdom, the paññaditthana, and you can go beyond form to attain the formless. So that means you contemplate all four great elements in this way. And when you attain to the formless, that means you've gone beyond form, then you reach infinite space, infinite consciousness, the plane of nothing, or even the plane of neither perception or non-perception. Now, I won't go into the detail of all of that again, because there is a Dhamma session on the exposition of the elements, and it's in part 1 that we go through many, many different examples and how to actually contemplate it in detail. There's also a question and answer on this particular sutta as well that also explains how to do this part of the meditation. So there's already things that we've looked at. Now, the question to ask is, why do we need to contemplate in this way? And the answer is because if we don't contemplate correctly, then we maintain the wrong view about this body, and we don't see it as impermanent or unlasting. We don't see that it is subject to change. And as a result, we actually grasp it as me and mine. So this means we remain duped by this collection of the four great elements. And we start to identify or continue to identify with them both internally and externally. And this is a large part of how we misapprehend and construct a permanent self. So we start to believe this collection of four great elements is mine. I am this collection of four great elements, and this collection of four great elements is myself. So this is the wrong view. Now, when the Buddha says what one thinks and ponders by night based upon one's actions during the day is the fuming by night, and then he says the actions one undertakes during the day by body, speech, and mind after thinking and pondering by night is the flaming by day, we can understand that fuming by night and flaming by day is caused by wrong view, because we have identified with these four great elements as me and mine. So when we fume by night, the thoughts that bombard us are about our actions we took during the day imbued by me and mine. For example, getting into an argument with someone who didn't agree with our perspective, bearing the weight of our loss on the stock market, dealing with the problems of our loved ones, worrying about how to manage our employees, stressing about a project that we're responsible for, getting angry with the utility company for charging us more, and so on and so forth. So there are disturbances in the mind about what we may have done during the day and said during the day, and in dealing with these things and how we think about these things. And the common denominator is how they're connected with what we've grasped or clung to as me and mine. So the wrong view results in us fuming by night. And then when it comes to flaming by day, these are the actions we take as we go about our responsibilities and duties, having fumed by night. So this is whether it's at home, work, or out in the community, we're still grasping to me and mine. And so we take actions through body, speech, and mind during the day that are on this basis. And so there is a protectiveness of whatever we take as me and mine. So for example, we would kill, steal, lie, tell someone off because of what is me and mine. And so this is how we end up blazing by day. Now, what you can see is fuming by night and blazing by day is deeply identified with the self, or me and mine. We assign permanency in this way, and the overall effect is to reinforce the wrong view, and the wrong actions stem out of that or rise from that. We end up standing on the wrong idea of me and my family, me and my job or career, me and my business, me and my material wealth, me and my reputation, me and my preferences, me and my knowledge or skills, me and my ideas, me and my spiritual attainments, or the rest of the worldly attainments, and so on. We ignorantly think that all these things are within our control, that we can make them last. So we come full circle again, thinking it's worth taking as me and mine. The fact that we worry at night and take actions the way we do during the day overturns this. Deep down, we know that our experience is finite. It doesn't last. We're not the ones in control. And the so-called pleasure that we grasp and try to recreate time and time again, when we really investigate with the Buddha's words, we can see it as it actually is, and it is actually dukkha. Our predicament is seen, and it can only result in dukkha. So it doesn't matter if we study a really good course or skill, have a good job, own a business, become successful, wealthy, have a big family, lots of friends, have power, authority, get respect in the world. These four great elements are still subject to aging, sickness, and death, and this whole mass of suffering. And so if we grasp onto them and take them as me and mine, then we will suffer. So if we see this correctly, have understood this Dhamma, then we won't fume by night and blaze by day. We would discard the form or the physical nutriment that is comprised of these four great elements, and at least to disidentify with it, not grasp onto it with the wrong view. Let's now look at the Brahman and the wise one. So remember the riddle says, thus spoke the Brahman, delve with the knife, thou wise one. So the Buddha explained this by saying the Brahman is the symbol for the Tathagata, accomplished and fully enlightened. The wise one is the symbol for a bhikkhu in higher training. So the Brahman, which is Brahmano in Pali, this represents the perfectly enlightened Buddha. So the one who is showing us the Noble Eightfold Path leading to the cessation of all suffering. The Buddha is the one giving us all the instructions in the riddle as we come upon different things. And so the wise one, and this is Sumedo in Pali, this represents the noble learner or trainee, the one who is undertaking the higher training, the adhisika, so the higher training in virtue, so sila sika, the concentration of mind, so adhicitta sika, so the first one was adhisila sika, the second concentration of mind is adhicitta sika, and wisdom is adhipanya sika. So technically speaking, if we go according to what the suttas say, there are 8 kinds of noble beings, there are 8 kinds of beings, and only 7 are considered sekas. And the stream entry and the one practicing to realize the fruit of stream entry is 2 of the 7. The once return and the one practicing to realize the fruit of once return is the other 2. So that makes 4. And then the non-returner and the one practicing to realize the fruit of non-return, that makes 6. And then the one practicing for perfection is 7. So the reason why we don't say 8 kinds of noble beings are learners, sekas, is because the perfected one, the one who is the arahant, the 8th, is actually no longer a seka. They're known as aseka because they have gone beyond the higher training and realized the fruit of arahantship. And of course, we always talk about the worldling or ordinary person. We know that in Pali as putujana. And this is considered neither a noble learner nor someone perfected in higher training. So it's important to know exactly where that stands. And so there are references in the suttas about this. One of them is the Pugala Sutta. This is Anguttara Nikaya, chapter 9, discourse number 9. So when we talk about delving with the knife, the Pali word here is abhikkhana, and it can be translated as delving or digging the ground. And the Pali word for the knife is ādeya sātang. And ādeya means you take it up, and sātang is this weapon, sword, or knife. So remember the riddle repeatedly says, thus spoke the Brahman, delve with the knife, thou wise one. And so the Buddha explained this by saying the knife is a symbol for noble wisdom. The delving is a symbol for the arousing of energy. So here, each time we keep delving with the knife, in the riddle, every time it says here about a specific obstruction, the Buddha is instructing us, arouse energy or make effort to apply noble wisdom to overcome it, to abandon it. And so this is what we must do. Let's now look at the bar. This is langi in Pali, and this can be translated also as a bolt or a barrier or an obstruction. So the riddle says, delving with the knife, the wise one saw a bar. A bar, O Venerable Sir, thus spoke the Brahman, throw out the bar, delve with the knife, thou wise one. So the Buddha explained this by saying the bar is a symbol for ignorance. So we know this in Pali as avijja. He says, throw out the knife, or throw out the bar, abandon ignorance. So that's what we need to do. And then he says, delve with the knife, thou wise one. This is the meaning. So we use wisdom, make effort to use wisdom to throw out the bar, so abandon ignorance. So it's important to make a point that this riddle is about throwing out or abandoning unwholesome things, abandoning obstructions to nibbana. It's not about simply observing and allowing them to be there. It's very clear in this riddle and in the instructions that if it's unwholesome, it shouldn't be there. So we're not allowed to tolerate them. We don't want them to keep coming back. So the advice from the Tathagata contained in the riddle is to actually remove them. Now, the Noble Eightfold Path is active. It's not passive. And this is why the Buddha advised to actively arouse energy, to apply wisdom to overcome whatever it is that's standing in our way. We don't back down, we don't roll over to any challenges that are still blocking our spiritual path. And this is very much the case in the meditation. So when it comes to throwing out this bar, it's about abandoning ignorance. Now, if we briefly refer to the Vammika Sutta, this is Samyutta Nikaya, discourse number 45, discourse number 1. And the Buddha says in that discourse, bhikkhus, ignorance is the forerunner in the entry upon unwholesome states, with shamelessness and fearlessness of wrongdoing following along. For an unwise person immersed in ignorance, wrong view springs up. For one of wrong view, wrong intention springs up. For one of wrong intention, wrong speech springs up. For one of wrong speech, wrong action springs up. For one of wrong action, wrong livelihood springs up. For one of wrong livelihood, wrong effort springs up. For one of wrong effort, wrong mindfulness springs up. For one of wrong mindfulness, wrong concentration springs up. So here we can see ignorance is a very big problem for us. Wrong view arises for a foolish or unwise person immersed in ignorance. And that means we are blocked from right view. Now, what is important to understand here is we need to abandon the wrong view. So when we contemplated the anthill just before being the 4 great elements, and we delved with the knife, arousing energy and applying wisdom to discern that the earth element, water element, wind or air element, and fire element, both internally and externally, are not me and mine, then we are actually saying anatta rather than atta. We are successful in this, then we are actually seeing it as it actually is with proper wisdom. And so we remove this bar by applying that kind of wisdom. So this first part of the meditation on the anthill is essentially getting right to the heart of our wrong view regarding self, regarding what we are holding on to as a permanent self. Now, if we correctly contemplate this anthill fuming by night and blazing by day, then we see the 4 great elements internally, externally as not mine. So our usual mode is to identify with the anthill, these 4 great elements. And when this happens, we construct the sense of self out of it. So the first part, we would say things like, I am this gender, I am born from this family, I am beautiful or ugly, I am this person who graduated from this university, I'm someone who has this kind of career that spans this number of years, I'm a virtuous or good person, I'm a powerful person, and so on. That's the first part of how we construct self. The second part is then, these are my parents, this house is mine, this car is mine, those respected or famous people are my friends, these children are mine, that business is mine, those investments are mine, and so on. And then finally, how we also construct is how if we go beyond the perception of form, then we get caught in, I'm a person who can attain to the formless, infinite space, infinite consciousness, the plane of nothing, the plane of neither perception or non-perception, and so on. And I can dwell in these formless attainments for a very long time, and it is pleasurable. And I can go beyond those and realize liberation. The point of this last one is that it gets to the point where you start to think you identify with those formless attainments. I am part of infinite space. I am infinite consciousness. I am part of nothingness, this plane of nothingness. And so again, we can construct in this way. Now, when you look at these different ways that we construct self, what we see is in all these areas, we can become very conceited and arrogant. If we grasp any of these things, this is known as I-making, ahankara in Pali. And out of ignorance and craving, we're conditioned to think, with this kind of wrong view. And so this is how we construct the perception of self, this atta sanya. me and mine. Now, when this happens, we want to start appropriating or keep appropriating external objects. And this is what leads to mind making. So mamankara. This process, what you can see, leads to the perception of pleasure. So sukha sanya. So we get, by getting external objects such as a new house or car or relationship, we take those as mine and we think we're happy. We keep reconstructing that process because we don't acknowledge aging and death. And what happens to even those objects, even our loved ones. And so this is how we go from the taint of ignorance to the taint of sensual desire. It is with that wrong view. The idea behind all of that is very much, I can fix this. And so in doing so, we become more and more conceited. That's basically what we do. And so we get very attached to all the things that are death-bound in nature, death-bound being subject to impermanence. Now, if we understand our predicament, even a little bit of this, then we would know that this is actually a lie. Because having contemplated the four great elements, and we see even a small part of dependent origination, we know the result of wrong view in this way means we're bound to the whole mass of suffering. What we've done in the past is the same thing. And if we continue in this lifetime to hold on to that wrong view about these four great elements, taking these things as me and mine, constructing a permanent sense of self, then it leads to yet another rebirth. And what is interesting is that if you have one of the three knowledges, the tevijja, if you have the ability to recall past lives, this can be very helpful when it comes to conceit or arrogance, because from one birth, we may be reborn as someone in the divine realm, and then another birth, we're born as a person with poverty in the human realm. Maybe another birth, we're reborn as a king in the human realm. Then another birth, we're born as a cow. Then another birth, we're born as a hungry ghost, and so on. And so there's nothing to really be conceited about if we're only subject to this dependent origination and bound because we are the owners of our karma, heirs to our karma. So it is only if we take the Buddha's instructions and follow them, meditate on the four great elements internally and externally and see them, like truly see them as not me and mine, then we can dismantle this wrong view and get out of this whole mass of suffering. Now, it's in this way that we overcome the idea of a permanent sense of self that is caught in an identity view, caught up in doubt, and clinging to virtue and observances. So at this point, we become a wise person because we do have a sense of shame and a fear of wrongdoing. So this is hiri and ottappa, towards greeting and holding on to this wrong view. The good qualities of shame and fear of wrongly taking these four great elements as me and mine, because it keeps us bound to samsara. So instead, by contemplating in the correct way, right view springs up, and then we develop the Noble Eightfold Path. So this is very important because one can attain to the path at this point. It's why we emphasize contemplating the four great elements in many sutta meditations, because if we do it correctly with wisdom, we give up the wrong view and right view springs up. And then we can develop the Noble Eightfold Path, the path of non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion. Any other development would take us down the wrong path. And so if we allow ignorance, which in this case, the riddle, it's this bar, if we allow it to remain, then we are having no sense of shame or fear of wrongdoing. And so the wrong view springs up, such as taking these four great elements as me and mine. And so we continue on the wrong path. We burn with greed, hatred, and delusion and remain bound to samsara. So this is what it means that abandoning ignorance, throwing out the bar, is to actually see this very, very clearly. So we now look at the toad. And in Pali, this is udamaika. And this is meant to represent swelling up or having a blown up appearance. The symbol of a toad is quite appropriate once we understand what it's meant to represent. So if you remember, the riddle says, delving with the knife, the wise one saw a toad. A toad, O Venerable Sir, thus spoke the Brahmin, throw out the toad, delve with the knife, thou wise one. So the Buddha has explained here, the toad is a symbol for anger and irritation. So this is called the upayasa in Pali. Throw out the toad, abandon anger and irritation. Delve with the knife, thou wise one. This is the meaning. So here it's translated this kodo payasa as anger and irritation. When we looked at this in the Potaliya Sutta, just for completeness, that was Majjhima Nikaya discourse number 54, we translated it as association with anger. So you can either use anger and irritation or anger and despair or association with anger. The key point is that we are angry. Now, when we are angry or associating with anger, there's a tendency to swell up, to blow up with the anger. And so that is why the toad is a symbol of this. Now, how does this happen? In simple terms, if you remember the definition for the first noble truth of suffering, we've said birth is suffering, aging is suffering, illness is suffering, death is suffering, pain, sadness, sorrow, lamentation, and despair. Separation from what is pleasing is suffering. Union with what is displeasing is suffering, and not getting what one wants is suffering. Now, when we are born, we are automatically subject to aging, sickness, and death, and this whole mass of suffering. What we actually want, knowingly and unknowingly, is not to age, not to get sick, not to die, and not to experience separation from loved ones and all the rest of it, this whole mass of suffering over and over. But we don't get what we want, do we? And this is why the Buddha encourages us to understand the arising and passing away phenomena, because this is what is binding us to this whole mass of suffering. When we understand this process of dependent arising, then we know we can break those links. We are conditioned by craving and ignorance to believe we can fix our predicament. And usually we think this through the lens of greed, hatred, and delusion, because that's what we've practiced before, what we're still practicing. So we think it is within our control to gain pleasure, that we can make it last. And that's the reason why we, take it as me and mine. So for example, we might think if I study this skill, or I get that job, or I marry that person, or if I have plastic surgery, or if I acquire wealth and power, if I have, plenty of kids, whatever idea we have, and then we think, oh, this will make me happy and I can make it last, or we just not even are concerned, we just believe it will be so. And then it goes on like that. So we don't see that something always comes to scupper that over and over. And so the examples may come in the form of our qualifications being superseded, having to study more, losing our job and having to find another one, getting a divorce, aging still happening despite plastic surgery, experiencing loss of wealth and power due to, some external event, having to deal with the separation from loved ones, receiving bad news about health, and so on. So as we've said before, it is out of ignorance that this comes to arise, because there is an underlying tendency to sensual lust, which lies latent in pleasurable feeling. So that's the kama raga, anuseya. There's also this underlying tendency to aversion, this patigha anuseya, that lies latent in painful feeling. And then, of course, we have the underlying tendency to ignorance, avijja anuseya, that lies latent in neither pleasurable nor painful feeling. So the truth of it is that we are always associating with anger in some form or another, whether we know it or not. It doesn't matter what we do, and it doesn't matter how we try to fix it. We can't get away from this predicament, which is ultimately death-bound. So you can see there is a connection here with our contemplation of the simile of the fruits on a tree, as the Buddha taught in the Potaliya Sutta. So we looked at this on our Dhamma session on noble retirement, in particular part 2. If you remember, a man wants to climb a tree to get the fruit, because the tree has a lot of fruit and no fruit has fallen to the ground. So he climbs the tree to get the fruit. And while he's still up in the tree, a second man comes along, also wanting the fruit, but he doesn't want to climb the tree, or he can't climb the tree. And so when he sees the same tree with a lot of fruit, he decides to cut it down to get the fruit. Now, if the first person doesn't come down quickly from the tree, then he might experience death or deadly suffering. So if we understand this, the simile of fruits on a tree, then we understand that no matter what we do by living, whether it's to gain material things or experiences, or to be a virtuous person, or attain to higher concentration, we can't sustain them. So we don't ultimately get what we want. We can't live on these fruits on a tree. We'll fall or get cut down by old age, sickness, and death. When we don't understand the bigger predicament, we end up associating with anger a whole lot more. So you can see that as we age, we tend to always be lamenting about that without recognizing the Dhamma about pain arising. If we birth this body, the harm due to form is a real thing. But if you understand it, some of this lamenting goes away because you know, this is actually the bigger predicament. So the truth is, craving for anything in samsara is death-bound and subject to this whole mass of suffering, whether it leads to rebirth in any existence in the sensual, form, or formless realms. So if we cling to anything like that, then the result is association with anger, or this anger and irritation, called upayasa in Pali. So when we delve with a knife, that is, arouse energy and apply wisdom, we ask, what is not death-bound? What does not result in being in association with anger? And the answer is nibbāna. So in our meditation, what we need to do when we see the toad is we need to give up anger and irritation by seeking nibbāna, set our goal as nibbāna. So this is how we throw out the toad. If we don't do this, if we think we can overcome it with sensual pleasures, or we can live like Potaliya and his version of retirement, or we can live with our jhana attainments, then we will keep associating with anger. So it's very important to really contemplate this. So we can now look at the fork or forked path. And this is Dvida Patto in Pali. So remember the riddle says, delving with the knife, the wise one saw a fork. A fork, O Venerable Sir. Thus spoke the Brahmin, throw out the fork, delve with the knife, thou wise one. Now the Buddha explained this by saying the fork is a symbol for doubt. So this is vicikicca. Throw out the fork, abandon doubt. Delve with the knife, thou wise one. That is the meaning. The doubt that the Buddha is talking about here is not doubt about the triple gem. So this is not doubt about the Buddha being worthy, being perfectly enlightened, consummate with knowledge and conduct, well gone, know of the worlds, unsurpassed trainer of people fit to be trained, the teacher of gods and humans, awakened and blessed. So it's not doubt about that. It's also not doubt about the Dhamma being well expounded by the Blessed One, directly visible, immediate, inviting one to come and see, applicable, to be personally experienced by the wise. So we don't have doubts about that. And neither do we have doubts about the Sangha, that there are the Blessed One's disciples who are practicing the good way, the straight way, the true way, the proper way, that there are these four pairs of persons, the 8 types of individuals, and they're worthy of gifts, hospitality, offerings, Anjali, and also they're the unsurpassed field of merit for the world. So we have conviction towards the Triple Gem. So we know that the Buddha is the right teacher for us. We know that his teachings are to be followed, that it is the Noble Eightfold Path that is the way leading to the ending of suffering. And we know that there are noble disciples who are practicing this way, and also those who have attained to the Noble Path. So we don't have doubt about any of that. So the fork or the fork path that we want to throw out here is the doubt that is or relates to how we're meant to develop the Noble Eightfold Path. So it may sound like, how am I meant to meditate on Buddha's teachings? How do I establish the right view? How can I understanding the arising and passing away phenomena? How do I do these sutta meditations and so on? So when we arouse energy and apply wisdom, what this means here, delving with the knife here, means we ask someone who knows how to develop the Noble Eightfold Path. And we ask someone to explain the Buddha's teaching, how to practice them. And so this is the way that we overcome doubt. And this can also mean going into the suttas and memorizing and those sorts of things, and seeking out people to then explain them. So now we come to the sieve. So this is Changavara in Pali. It's also translated as strainer. And if you remember, the riddle says, delving with the knife, the wise one saw a sieve. A sieve, O Venerable Sir. Thus spoke the Brahmin, throw out the sieve, delve with the knife, thou wise one. So the Buddha explained this by saying, the sieve is a symbol for the 5 hindrances. So this is the pancha nibbāna. namely the hindrance of sensual desire, the hindrance of ill will, the hindrance of sloth and torpor, the hindrance of restlessness and remorse. Remorse is also translated as worry, and the hindrance of doubt. So the Buddha says, throughout the sieve, abandon the 5 hindrances, delve with the knife, thou wise one. This is the meaning. So we know from this other Avijja Sutta, so Anguttara Nikaya chapter 10, discourse number 61, that the 5 hindrances are the nutriment for ignorance. So this part of the riddle is to ensure that we are not allowing ignorance to be nourished again. And we know in the meditation, when our mind wanders or it gets caught in something, that is not good for the 5 hindrances to come in. We don't want, having contemplated the anthill, the bar, and the toad, these things, applying wisdom, we don't want ignorance to then come back and be a problem. So just as we know that the 5 hindrances are the corruptions of the mind, the weakeners of wisdom, the 7 factors of enlightenment, so satta bojjhanga, are the non-obstructions, non-hindrances, non-corruptions of the mind. And when we develop the bojjhangas, they lead to the realization of the fruit of true knowledge and liberation. So when we're able to keep the 5 hindrances out or remove them if they arise, it enables us to develop the 7 factors of enlightenment. So again, what we want to do is to abandon the 5 hindrances that would nourish ignorance. Now, we have spoken about the Buddha's toolkit of medicine for denourishing or overcoming the 5 hindrances many times, and there are Dhamma sessions that can be accessed on that. Now, I'll summarize some of the key things the Buddha generally advises, but the context here is at a higher level, because where we're at in this meditation is we're halfway through and we've actually removed a substantial portion of wrong view. And we've also removed somewhat a certain level of ignorance as well. And we're some way through on our way to Nibbana. So the context is at this higher level. So bear that in mind. And so the key when we get to this point is actually to recognize that we don't want to go backwards. We don't want to reintroduce unwholesome things back into our meditation. That is the point of this, because that is what will hinder or veer us off the wisdom path towards Nibbana. So for sensual desire, kamacchanda in Pali, the Buddha stated that this is the hindrance that is nourished by frequent unwise contemplation of the sign of beautiful. So in the first part of the meditation on the anthill, we contemplated the 4 great elements, both internally and externally, as not me and mine. But now with this hindrance of sensual desire, if it comes to trouble us, then when an object comes to the mind made up of the 4 great elements, such as a person or a physical object or food, then what we're taking into our mind is beauty or something that is beautiful. And if this is the case, then we need to denourish this with the sign of foulness. So this is the asubha nimitta. So for example, if we are thinking about a person, say a person comes to our mind in the middle of our meditation, then we need to see the person as they actually are. So we've already contemplated the 4 great elements and we're not taking them as mind, but then now we need to look at them maybe as the 32 body parts, to see hair of the body, nails, teeth, saliva, urine, excrement, and so on. That if we see the foul nature, that there are unclean and impurities in this body, in these 32 body parts, then we're applying wisdom, and with the right view, we're able to abandon that sensual thought. And so at that point, we then have the thought of renunciation, the nekkhamma vitakka, as opposed to the kama vitakka. Another way of looking at it is also, if you've studied the Anenjasapaya Sutta, and this is Majjhima Nikaya discourse number 106, and some of us have studied this offline, the Buddha has stated that sensual pleasures are impermanent, hollow, false, deceptive, and illusory. And this is a very important phrase for us to contemplate, because it's very helpful for overcoming sensual desire. When we really see the truth in what the Buddha has taught here, then we know that we don't want to be caught in Mara's cage, Mara's domain. We want to give up any attachment to sensual pleasures. And this is a very important point, because we live in a sensual realm. We're constantly being enticed by everything around us, whether it's the person at the beach wearing, bikini, or something, wearing not much, or at a nightclub or at the shops, or whether it's a person being described by other people, all these things lead to the wrong view. Or programs shown on the television, movies, the internet keeps giving us the sign of beautiful. That's the measuring stick. Or it's even in our memories that we want to revisit and recreate. Some of those come up in our meditation. So it's very important to have at the forefront of our mind the danger in sensual pleasures, that they're actually deceptive, they're hollow, they're false, and they're illusory. And so this is why we would want to guard the doors to the sense faculties, because we don't want the mind to get polluted. And not only that, we use sensual pleasures as our go-to fix. And so when that becomes our habitual tendency, when we experience painful feeling, we keep going in that direction, like going to the fridge, turning on the TV, switching channels, going out somewhere, meeting up with people, booking holidays, buying things, and on it goes. The problem is that we keep thinking we can fix it with sensual pleasures. And the truth of it is that we can't. And so we need to see the temporary and death-bound nature in sensual pleasures. And the greatest danger is if we keep thinking that we can fix and reconstruct something pleasurable that we've experienced in the past, what you see when you really contemplate it is that we can't match those experiences due to aging. And we can test this in every aspect of our life, because the most obvious is our taste buds, but it applies to everything else. There's always a gap between what we want that we had in the past and what we experience now in the pleasure. And this happens at the level of form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness. And that's what needs to also be seen. So when we see it in this way, then we remove the block to nibbāna. Now, as we know from the first profitable direction, which starts with the physical nutriment and ends with going the wrong way with desire, if we have understood this particular insight pathway, this mode of progress that the Buddha talks about, we do not want consciousness to establish on form due to sensual desire. And why is that? It's because if we see and take something as beautiful, then we unwisely contemplate it. And when we grasp onto that sign of beautiful, then unarisen sensual desire will arise, as well as the ones that are already there will increase and expand. So if consciousness gets established, then dependent origination follows. And if this happens, then knowingly or unknowingly, we increase our desire to continue in samsara, and we lean away from nibbāna. Now, the next one is ill will. And the Buddha stated that this is where we nourish by frequent unwise contemplation of the sign of repulsive. So this is patigha nimitta. Ill will often arises when the pleasure we experience subsides, or the experience is there's a gap between what we want and what we get, as we've said before, or what we expect and also what actually happens. And so when we have to deal with the effects of aging as a very important thing, what we meet is something that we don't like. So this is the sign of repulsive. Now, the truth is we often have this sign of repulsive because of the impermanent nature of condition. And we can't actually fix it. There's no permanent fix with whatever we're trying to fix in samsara. It's also due to this harm due to form. What we don't understand is ill will arises when we blame other people instead of understanding, having birthed this body, it is subject to aging, and this is the harm due to form. So we can't permanently fix the decline in our eyesight. We can temporarily help it a little bit, but it's still decline. We get the same thing with our hearing, with our taste buds, with the aging of the body and so forth. And quite often we see others blaming for this, and we also blame ourselves. And that's what happens, when it comes to this body. So contemplating and understanding this correctly can be very helpful. And it may be going back even to the four great elements, seeing the impermanent nature. Now, the medicine that the Buddha often recommended when it comes to ill will, as we know, or even for anger, is loving kindness, metta. So if we cultivate metta as the Buddha instructed in the Karaniya Sutta, then we're able to develop the 10 skilled states, which includes right view. So right view is the one that understands this predicament that we have been transmigrating through this samsara without a discoverable beginning. And it recognizes the harm due to form that each of us has to experience with birth in this existence. So we don't want to allow consciousness to establish on form and result in this whole massive suffering. So if we have metta, then we understand the predicament and we can abandon the ill will. If we don't do this, then unarisen ill will arrive, and also arisen ill will expand or increase. And this is something that we don't want. So in our meditation, we have to be very vigilant about this. When it comes to sloth and torpor, or dullness and drowsiness, so this is dhinamitta in Pali, the Buddha stated that this hindrance is nourished by frequent unwise contemplation of discontent, lethargy, lazy stretching, drowsiness after meals, sluggishness of the mind. Now, the Buddha often used the simile of being in a prison for sloth and torpor. The mind is sick and the mental states are also sick with greed, hatred, and delusion, and though it's predominantly delusion that is leading it. So, for example, we may have indulged in some kind of food, we've overeaten, and we're now slouching on the couch feeling drowsy. And the mind is in a weakened state. So from that weakened state, we make poor choices because there's sickness with our feelings and our perceptions. So we might choose to binge watch TV, the mind weakens even more. We go online, make unwise purchases. The mind weakens some more. We post to social media, go to an online forum, we post some more, maybe get into certain issues and challenges there, and the mind weakens some more. So the Buddha gave different kinds of medicines to overcome sloth and torpor, such as in the Paccalayammana Sutta, Anguttara Nikaya, chapter 7, discourse number 61, which we've been through before. And, this was when Venerable Mahamoggallana was troubled by drowsiness prior to his awakening. And the main two that we should often apply to overcome and abandon sloth and torpor is, the first one is arousing energy. So the Buddha refers to the element of arousal, the element of endeavor, the element of exertion. And all of these things fall under the auspices of arousing energy in one form or another. And the second is the perception of light, so the loka sanya. And this means undertaking the perception of daylight, so that as by day, so at night, as at night, so by day. So this helps us to develop a mind that is radiant and luminous. So rather than the gloomy, covered, weakened mind, we have the radiant or luminous mind. And when we have this perception of light that is well developed, it actually helps us to see the sick perceptions that are corrupting the mind. And if we see them, then we can remove them. So when we apply these medicines recommended by the Buddha, it helps us to see things as it actually is with proper wisdom. So we don't allow ourselves to tolerate a corrupt or sick mind. And we don't allow sick perceptions to be there, such as maybe taking the perception of beauty or the perception of permanence or things of those nature. So if we apply medicine, then we overcome this. There's no more sloth and torpor that arises, and we remove what is already there. And then when it comes to restlessness and worry, the Buddha says, and in Pali this is uddhacca kukucca, the Buddha says that we nourish this by frequent unwise contemplation of the unsettledness of the mind. So sometimes in the meditation, the mind can actually seem a little unwieldy. And the Petakopadesa actually refers to two conditions for restlessness to arise. The first is something called the lust-provoking delight. So when the mind is unsettled, disturbed, it starts to become provocative of things with delight. So it goes from one thing to another thing with restlessness. So it sounds like, oh, I'll do this, and then, oh no, I'll do that. And it goes back and forth between things. So the medicine for that is to make sure that the samadhi is there, the samma samadhi is there. So if you feel like you're falling from, a higher concentration, you uplift the mind to make sure you stay there. Or if the mind has fallen from the higher concentration, you lift it up to get back there. So it might be contemplating what we contemplated before, whether it's the anthill or whether it's the toad or bar, whatever it is that helped you to get to the higher concentration. So you don't want it to slide. The second condition that the Petakopadesa talks about is the gratifying faculty. And so this is where we get into something that sort of gives us satisfaction or gratification. And then we worry that we're holding on to something. So it sounds like, oh, this is really good, but what if I get stuck in this higher concentration and lose sight of my goal? So here, this is an example of hanging on to maybe, say, for example, space is infinite. And because it's so stable there, we forget that nibbāna is the one that we want. And we forget that maybe infinite space, if we've attained to infinite space, we forget that actually one can fall from that. If one thinks about form, you immediately fall from the formless state of infinite space. And when that happens, we again become associated with anger. And so when we grasp onto higher concentrations, then we know that we have veered off. And this is an important thing, that people start to glorify higher concentrations. But the point is, they are means to an end, because in the higher concentrations, you're actually free from the 5 hindrances. But at the same time, it's from there then you start to really see, what am I still holding on to? And so you don't want to veer off the path to nibbana. As we were saying at the start of talking about these 5 hindrances, this is at a higher level. We actually want to apply this medicine so that when we contemplate, even having contemplated the toad, we also bring this into this part where we remember we're actually seeking nibbana. Our goal is nibbana. And then when it comes to worry, this is connected with unwholesome things we've done, or even good things that we haven't been able to do. So to overcome worry, we need to actually, when it comes to the transgressions, like the wrongdoings, the unwholesome things, we need to make a very strong determination not to do it again. So as we said before, if we admit 3 times and make a strong determination 3 times that this is something that we don't want to do, even if we ask for forgiveness from Buddha Dhamma Sangha for these things that we've done in the past, this is the key, that we are saying we disapprove of those things. And so this is how we remove that kind of worry from the mind. And so it's important to see that wrong actions by body, speech, and mind are what keeps bringing us back to the same bad predicament. And so we have to abandon them. So admitting transgressions goes a long way to helping us to maintain the right view. And when it comes to good things that are unfulfilled, and here we're particularly talking about the Dhamma path, we need to remember that with whatever knowledge was available to us at the time, we did our best within our capacity. And so each and every time we make the determination to arouse energy towards developing more wholesome actions and ensure that we maintain and protect the wholesome things that we have developed. So these are things like right view, or if we have developed path and fruit, we protect that and lift it. And this is in order to fully develop the Noble Eightfold Path and realize Nibbana. So this is really important in terms of applying these different kinds of medicine. So what we want to do is make sure that unarisen restlessness and worry doesn't arise. And if it has arisen, then we don't want it to be there. We don't want it to increase and expand. For doubt, which is the final one, the Buddha states that this hindrance is nourished by frequent unwise contemplation of things that are the basis for doubt. So we're talking about vicikicca again. So doubt has already come up in this meditation a number of times. And at this juncture now, we're addressing it in a much deeper sense. So this is the doubt that is connected with the taints. Because although we may have corrected some of our wrong view, and we may have removed some of the uncertainty about the path up to this point in the meditation, there is still doubt that is caused by the taints that we haven't destroyed. So this doubt is blocking us from realizing Nibbana, and that is what we look at here. Now, we have mentioned before that these 5 hindrances are linked. So for example, sensual desire makes us believe we can fix whatever we're experiencing as painful. When sensual pleasures change, diminish, or end, we experience ill will. From ill will, we get sloth and torpor. The mind is sick and the mental states are sick. From sloth and torpor, we get restlessness and worry and doubt. And to overcome doubt that is connected with the taints, we really need to look at what makes doubt arise, what makes doubt cease. So the way the 5 hindrances work needs to be understood. Now, in very simple terms, it comes back to the idea that we can fix everything with sensual pleasures. This includes material things as well as spiritual attainments. The higher concentrations have properties of form, and we constantly contact the form, and so we misapprehend. The doubt here keeps triggering the taint of ignorance to the taint of sensual desire, because we think we can fix it. We take refuge in it. And so the taint of sensual desire has this post-perception of pleasure or sukha that is factored into it. For example, if I buy this new gadget and replace my old one, this will make me happy. If I lose my job, I'll find a better one and this will make me happy. I just got divorced, but if I find another person, maybe we'll get married and then I'll be happy. If I go and enter into the formless attainments and stay there for a very long time, I can block out the world and be happy. In all these scenarios, the facts or the truth that we deny are that these things are unlasting. They're subject to change and suffering. So we can't afford to take any of them as me and mine. If we remove sensual desire and seeing it as it actually is, then we won't misapprehend and fall for it, and the other hindrances won't get connected. We would really see that the only way out of suffering is actually nibbāna. And so this doubt gets removed because the doubt keeps arising because we keep turning to sensual pleasures, and it kicks off the other hindrances as well. Doubt keeps arising. Maybe I can fix it with this. Maybe I can fix it with that. And a little bit of pleasure keeps almost like giving us this wrong idea that it's true. So when we actually see that the only way out of suffering is nibbāna, that we disprove the truth of sensual pleasure, we see how we keep activating ill will, sloth and torpor, weaken the mind, have restlessness and worry. In the process of the 5 hindrances, they're very dangerous. But in the process of contemplating them, what we come to realize is we're completely lying to ourselves. It's not true. There's something in us that knows that. That's why the hindrances are so unwieldy. And hence why the medicine for them is so important. When doubt gets removed by wisdom in this way, that we actually see sensual pleasures for what they are, we don't want to kick off this whole thing, then we actually realize that we don't want to go from taint of ignorance to taint of sensual pleasures to fix anything. So if we can do this, then the other hindrances don't get triggered. And the main thing is that we don't fall for the same things again. So if you think about coming to this birth, we've fallen for it before. We've fallen for creating another birth, and we get harmed by this form. And so we get angry. We keep weakening the mind. Should I do this? Should I do that? Will this work? Will the other thing work? And then doubt and all this sort of thing. And this is what caused another rebirth. We keep choosing wrongly out of these 5 hindrances because they really do nourish ignorance. So instead, we need to have impermanent suffering and not self or not me and mine at the forefront of our mind. Like having understood these 3 characteristics, anicca, dukkha, anatta, even to this point in the meditation, even from our previous meditations, then we certainly don't want to keep activating taints, because once you activate taint of ignorance to taint of sensual desire, the taint of existence also kicks in, because it says, well, if I like these things, if I can get this pleasure from it, then I want to come into existence again for this same thing. And with this wrong view, the taint of views kicks in. So instead, what we want is actually to say, I want the permanent safety, the permanent or supreme happiness of nibbāna, that which does not end up with death. It's not death-bound, isn't subject to this whole mass of suffering. And so this is how we apply it at the higher level. If we do so, then unarisen doubt will not arise, and that which has arisen will be removed. And so this is how we delve with the knife, which means arousing energy and apply wisdom to throw out the sieve. So throw out these 5 hindrances, abandon the 5 hindrances. So then we come to the tortoise. So this is kumo in Pali. And remember, the riddle says, delving with the knife, the wise one saw a tortoise. A tortoise, O venerable sir. Thus spoke the Brahmin, throw out the tortoise, delve with the knife, thou wise one. The Buddha explained this by saying, The tortoise is a symbol for the 5 aggregates affected by clinging. So this is Pancha Upadana Kanda, namely the material form aggregate affected by clinging, the feeling aggregate affected by clinging, the perception aggregate affected by clinging, the formations aggregate affected by clinging, the consciousness aggregate affected by clinging. Throughout the tortoise, abandon the 5 aggregates affected by clinging. Delve with the knife, thou wise one. This is the meaning. So we have looked at these 5 aggregates affected by clinging before, and we know this from our contemplation of the Samadhi Bhavana Sutta. So this is Samyutta Nikaya, chapter 22, discourse number 5. So if you remember our talk on craving because of arising and passing away of these 5 aggregates, this is the meditation that we turn to here. And in that meditation, we looked at the arising or origin and passing away phenomena of these 5 aggregates affected by clinging. So we saw their impermanence. So as we know from the first noble truth of suffering, birth is suffering, aging is suffering, and so on, we come to these 5 aggregates affected by clinging are also suffering. So using the instructions given by the Buddha in the Samadhi Bhavana Sutta, so the discourse on concentration, we contemplated arising and passing away of form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness. We actually saw impermanence of these 5 aggregates, and it's a very, very important meditation. It is the cornerstone of what we need, and as we can see in this Vammika Sutta, it's much needed to perfect this path. Now, when we contemplated the anthill, that is these 4 great elements, as not me and mine, both internally and externally, we've gone beyond form and attained to formless. So it might be space is infinite or higher. Now, if we seek delight, welcome, and remain holding in Pali, abhinandati, abhivadati, ajosayatitati, to the high attainment. So in this case, we've said the example is space is infinite or infinite space. Then we have delight towards the perception of infinite space. And with the delight as condition, clinging. With clinging as the condition, existence. With existence as the condition, birth. So what does this mean? It means we would be reborn in the realm of infinite space if we're clinging to the perception of infinite space. So the same applies to the perception of infinite consciousness, the perception of the plane of nothing, and the plane of neither perception nor non-perception. So this is how to understand the arising phenomena regarding perception. Now we look at the passing away phenomena. Here we do not seek delight, do not welcome, and do not remain holding. So in Pali, this is nabhinandati, nabhivadati, najosayatitati. So we are not seeking delight to the perception of infinite space, not welcoming the perception of infinite space, and not remaining holding to the perception of infinite space. So then delight ceases. With the cessation of delight comes the cessation of clinging. With the cessation of clinging comes the cessation of existence. With the cessation of existence comes the cessation of birth. And with the cessation of birth, this means the cessation of the whole mass of suffering. So this is what needs to be done for this part of the meditation, because we've lifted our mind to one of the formless attainments. And then we use the Buddha's instructions from the Samadhi Bhavana Sutta, and we make sure that we're not clinging to any of these perceptions. So these formless attainments are not nibbāna, though they share the same characteristics as nibbāna. That's what we said and been through before. The problem is that if we are being reborn to these formless realms, it is still death-bound. And if we haven't attained to the noble path, that is, we haven't attained path and fruit of either stream entry, non-return, once return, or even the path of arahantship, then we don't have any insurance for falling down to the lower realms. So, and we could spend a very long time in the formless and then drop down to lower realm. And so it's very important for us to see the arising and passing away phenomena of perception. The reason this step of the meditation is focusing mainly on the formless attainments is because up to this point, we've already addressed sensuality, we've already addressed the issue about form and trying to fix using sensual pleasures. And then we've also seen that what's left is this thinking about living without the form, that we can fix this predicament by living without form, forgetting that there's still properties of form even in the formless. And so the only thing that we really want to see, having seen through the tortoise by looking at this arising and passing away phenomena of perception, is to see that Nibbana provides the permanent safety and supreme happiness. And so this is how we throw out the tortoise by abandoning the 5 aggregates affected by clinging. So we then come to the butcher's knife and block. So asisuna in Pali, and asisuna can also be translated as a slaughterhouse. The Buddha has used this simile of a butcher's knife and block or slaughterhouse before in a number of discourses, and he's used it in reference to sensual pleasures. Now here, if you remember, the riddle says, delving with the knife, the wise one saw a butcher's knife and block. A butcher's knife and block, O Venerable Sir, thus spoke the Brahmin, throw out the butcher's knife and block, delve with the knife, thou wise one. The Buddha explained this by saying the butcher's knife and block is a symbol for the 5 chords of sensual pleasure. So pancha karma guna. So forms cognizable by the eye that are wished for, desired, agreeable, and likable, connected with sensual desire and provocative of lust. And then he says the same for sounds cognizable by the ear, odors cognizable by the nose, flavors cognizable by the tongue, tangibles cognizable by the body. And those are all wished for, desired, agreeable, likable, connected with sensual desire and provocative of lust. Throw out the butcher's knife and block, abandon the 5 chords of sensual pleasure, delve with the knife, thou wise one. This is the meaning. So here the Buddha is specifically using the butcher's knife and block as a symbol for the 5 chords of sensual pleasure. Our meditation is already at a very refined level. So if we get enticed now by the 5 chords of sensual pleasure at this point in our meditation, then we will be going back into something that we have already given up, which are sensual pleasures, and it would activate the wrong view again and culminate in ignorance again. So there is Dhamma that we already know from a number of suttas that we have explained or examined, and particularly from Dhatu Vibhanga Sutta. So this is Majjhima Nikaya discourse number 140, and we can apply it here. So if you remember, the Buddha gave a simile of the 2 fire sticks, and the Buddha said, Bhikkhu, just as from the contact and friction of 2 fire sticks, heat is generated and fire is produced. And with the separation and disjunction of these 2 fire sticks, the corresponding heat ceases and subsides. So too, independent on contact to be felt as pleasant, to be felt as painful, to be felt as neither painful nor pleasant, there arises a neither painful nor pleasant feeling, and so on. And so he culminates that by saying, one understands with the cessation of that same contact to be felt as all those things, its corresponding feeling ceases and subsides. So what we need to pick up there is when contact ceases, the corresponding feeling ceases. If we don't have contact to create friction between the 2 fire sticks, then no fire would be produced, no heat would be produced. So this is the same for feeling. If we don't activate the sense process for contact to arise, then no feeling arises. If we get the cessation of contact, we get the cessation of feeling. And with the cessation of feeling, we get the cessation of craving. So this is a very important part of Paticca Samuppada, dependent origination. So what do we do in our meditation now? We need to use the butcher's knife and block to chop off the 5 chords of sensual pleasures. So we're chopping off forms cognizable by the eye, sounds cognizable by the ear, odors cognizable by the nose, flavors cognizable by the tongue, tangibles cognizable by the body. And so these are all the things that would make us wish for, desire, find them agreeable, likable, anything connected with sensual desire, provocative of lust. So we are really making a very concerted point here about the non-greed path. So we are actually chopping off contact, because if we chop off contact, which means the cessation of contact, then we have the cessation of feeling. And if we've understood dependent origination, cessation of feeling is the condition for the cessation of craving. And if we have the cessation of craving, is the condition for the cessation of clinging. With the cessation of clinging, it's the cessation of condition for the cessation of existence. And with the cessation of existence is the condition for the cessation of birth. And so that means the ending of this whole mass of suffering. So this is how, again, we come to this thing that may arise in the mind, and we're saying, no, let's throw out this butcher's knife and block, having chopped it off. So this is how we abandon the 5 cords of sensory pleasure. We don't reintroduce this, and we get closer to nibbana. So then we come to the piece of meat. So we're pretty much to the end of the insight pathway. This is the last significant thing before we get to the Naga serpent. So in Pali, this is mam sapesi. And the Buddha has used this simile of a piece of meat or flesh in a number of discourses with reference to, again, sensual pleasures. So remember the riddle says, delving with a knife, the wise one saw a piece of meat. A piece of meat, O Venerable Sir. Thus spoke the Brahmin, throw out the piece of meat. Delve with a knife, thou wise one. And the Buddha explained this by saying, the piece of meat is a symbol for delight and lust. And in Pali, this is nandiraga. Throw out the piece of meat, abandon delight and lust. Delve with a knife, thou wise one. This is the meaning. So nandiraga is also translated as pleasure and lust or passionate Mahasalayatana Sutta. This is Majjhima Nikaya discourse number 149. The Buddha actually says, or has said, one's craving, which brings renewal of being or rebirth, which is punobhavika in Pali, is accompanied by delight and lust, nandiraga, and delight in this and that increases. So what this means is that now that we have got to this very last part of the meditation, where there's still delight and lust, this nandiraga, this is what would support craving towards some kind of rebirth. So what this means is that consciousness still wants to reconstruct after death. It still has this idea, having trained itself in previous births and trained it even in this lifetime. Yes, let's go and establish consciousness somewhere after birth. Now, this is because we're so used to it in everyday life. Now, most people think death just purely means death of something like a body. And that is true, it's included in this. But in everyday life, we're still reconstructing with consciousness something that has died. So it could be a mouthful of food that we swallow. We reconstruct consciousness by taking another mouthful and then another mouthful because we want to reconstruct the pleasure of eating. When we're made redundant from a job, we think, oh, I'll get another one. And so you go about the business of applying and getting another one. So consciousness has died in one job and it's reconstructing in another one. And so you get up to the bigger picture of birth, aging, sickness, and death. And then with the death of this body, consciousness would think, oh, it's a good idea to go look for another body, another birth, or another existence somewhere. So when you look at death in that respect and what consciousness is trained to do, then nandiraga is really the delight and lust to be reborn after death. That's what it means. So just like we're used to and what we've done over and over before, nandiraga is saying it's good to do it. It's similar to what we've said at the beginning of this meditation, that we construct a self thinking there's pleasure, when in reality, when you really investigate it, what we crave for and cling to, the result is always dukkha. So delight and lust, nandiraga, is saying, oh, it's a good idea to do this. It will be pleasurable. There's no suffering. But what we know throughout the entire meditation on Vammika Sutta is that this is a lie. What we create, what we crave, what we have tanha towards results in suffering, this whole mass of suffering. One way of overcoming delight and lust, this nandiraga, is to really investigate aging. So aging is not simply aging of this form, it's also aging of feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness. It's a very deep subject. So in the meditation, you would really look at it. The reality is that our consciousness can never match what it's constructed before. And that this is due to aging, which we've mentioned and touched on before. So when it comes to form, for example, of course, this is naturally about the body, the faculties, how they age. When it comes to feeling, it's really to see how, with the experience, the feeling changes. When it comes to perception, what we experience in the present, for example, it doesn't match with our previous ones. It cannot match. When it comes to volitional formations, aging that affects whatever we mentally construct, whether it's a job, a relationship, any kind of thing that we pick up. And then when it comes to consciousness, when you investigate how contact arises, as we touched on before, well, when we study the Vammika Sutta, we know that it involves the sense base, the sense object, and the sense consciousness for contact to arise. So you need the eye, you need the object that the eye would meet, and you also need the eye consciousness. And when these three things are there, then that's how contact arises. And each of these things, when you go through each of the sense consciousness, sense objects, and sense bases, we can never match what was constructed before. So if you take the mouthful of food, we need the tongue, the food, and the tongue consciousness for contact to arise. And then with contact, we get the feeling. Now, when we investigate the best meal that we've ever eaten, maybe it was something we had at childhood. And what we do in our lives, what we're not maybe conscious of doing, is that we're constantly trying to reconstruct, oh, that was the best one I had. And normally we say, oh, it doesn't match. It's not as good as what my mom cooked, or it's not as good as that place I went to 20 years ago. And what you see is it's impossible. And for what reason? Is because the tongue has aged. So the taste buds have aged. The food itself is not the same. The tongue consciousness has also aged. So whatever we try to reconstruct in this way, it is ultimately flawed. And it is ultimately a hopeless process. So when you understand aging in this much deeper sense, then it's possible to overcome or remove this delight and lust for rebirth after death, because you know what you're seeking cannot be matched. It only keeps resulting in pain, sadness, sorrow, displeasure, despair, the whole mess of suffering. And so that's one way. Another way to remove delight and lust is to do this particular contemplation. And we've done some of it before. So the first one is, if it is impermanent, so anicca, suffering, dukkha, and subject to change, vipranama, is it worth taking as me and mine? So you see the Buddha using this in many, many suttas when he asked the monks this question through a series of questions, but we've just put it down to one question. And so when you ask this question, is it impermanent? If it is impermanent suffering and subject to change, is it worth taking as me and mine? We need to contemplate this very, very well. And of course, we have the guided meditation online for this. And we've also looked at the Simile Sutta as one example where the Buddha went through it. But our answer should be no. It is not worth taking as me and mine. We should not be taking it as me and mine if it is impermanent suffering and subject to change. This is the same thing as what we looked at, looking at the 4 great elements, the anthill. It's the same thing. The answer is no. I want to discard, the 4 great elements. I want to discard anything that is impermanent suffering and subject to change. So then the second part that you ask is, if it is not worth taking as me and mine. So if our answer has been no, it is not worth taking as me and mine, then we ask, should we have this nandiraga, this delight and lust, to be reborn after death? So we contemplate that question. And again, our answer should be no. It is not worth having delight and lust, nandiraga, to be reborn after death. Because if we have clear comprehension of the first part of the question, that it is impermanent suffering and subject to change, then why would we actually have delight in lust in being reborn again in any kind of existence? And then the last question that we ask is, if we don't have delight and lust to be reborn after death, is this pleasurable or suffering? And so you really think about it. If you've answered correctly for the first 2 questions, then this answer should really come into the mind very strongly. And the answer is that it's pleasurable, like having given up this delight and lust to be reborn after death. Because what we're saying here is to be reborn after death is suffering. That's why we've given up delight and lust to be reborn. So that means delight and lust not to be reborn after death is pleasurable. It's happiness, which means nibbāna, the supreme happiness of nibbāna. This is what this meditation culminates in. And so when you think about this other talk that we did where Venerable Kumārakassapa was asked by a wanderer, what is happiness and what is suffering. This is Pathamassukha Sutta in Anguttara Nikaya. Venerable Sariputta simply answers, rebirth, friend, is suffering. No rebirth is happiness. And so this is what we come to understand in this meditation on Vammika Sutta, something so straightforward that Venerable Sariputta just simply answers, what is happiness, what is suffering. We've peeled away, chipped away, removed, listened to the Buddha and done these meditation steps in this sequence to come to this final part that says, wanting to be reborn after death is dukkha, so I'm going to remove this piece of me, and this is how I'm doing it. And so Venerable Sariputta in that particular sutta says, when there is rebirth, this suffering is to be expected. Cold, heat, hunger, thirst, defecation, and urination, being afflicted by fire, sticks or knives, and relatives and friends get together and scold one. When there is rebirth, there is suffering to be expected. So he offers a different perspective as well, and we can include that. When there is no rebirth, this happiness is to be expected. No cold, no heat, no hunger, no thirst, no defecation, no urination, no being afflicted by fire, sticks or knives, and relatives and friends don't get together and scold one. When there is no rebirth, this happiness is to be expected. When you reflect on Venerable Sariputta's words here, having just gone through Vammika Sutta, you really see that it's really understood. And we can include all our jati vitukkha into this, all the pain and suffering that we go through on a daily basis because we birth this body, having the vipaka, the fruit of our previous wrong choices, and seeing that and including that in why we don't want to be reborn after death. That doesn't mean we dishonor our loved ones in this lifetime and the things that we've had to do in this lifetime that may have been worthy of respect and honorable and everything. We don't dishonor any of that. But I think the point is that when you see the truth, when the blinders have been lifted, when the wisdom has been applied in this way, then you really realize nibbāna is that supreme happiness. And if you meditate as Venerable Kumārakassapa did with kaya viveka, chitta viveka, go to a place and actually have this as your goal, you can really see that it is possible. Even theoretically, you can see it as possible, that there's something very powerful with this riddle, with what has been given from, the deity, the noble being from the pure abodes, and that it has originated originally from the Buddha, and that's why the Buddha can explain it in this way. And so we can include Venerable Sariputta's words here. Now, in the Nandikaya Sutta, so this is Samyutta Nikaya, chapter 22, discourse 51, and there are other discourses similar. The Buddha has said about delight and lust. With the destruction of delight and lust, the mind becomes liberated and is said to be well liberated. So this is this final piece, because when you give up Nandi Raga, there is nothing left of covetousness, this abhijja, to say, I want another birth. So you can even link this to the Karaniya-metta Sutta, where that's the final bit that we give up at Karaniya-metta Sutta. But this is even more than that, because with Karaniya-metta Sutta, it's saying, I don't want to come back into a mother's womb. But in our meditation on Vammika Sutta, we've taken it further, because we've actually said we don't even want to be reborn thinking of infinite space or any of those arupa realms. We're not going to identify, I am infinite consciousness, I am any of these things. I'm not going to even want to be there for a very long time. And so when you think about abandoning delight and lust, Nandi Raga, at this point, this last part of the meditation, you're actually saying there's no abhijja for sensual realms, or formless realms. And so rebirth is ended. And that's something that resonates when you think rebirth is ended. That's what we all want to hear. That's even saying it out makes one so happy. Rebirth is ended. Because most of the time when we meditate, there's something that in us knows rebirth is not ended. And there's a sadness that comes with it. But that's a sadness that we can use to invigorate our practice. And so when you read this here, that we give up, we remove delight and lust, and then you link this with this Nandikaya Sutta, the removal of delight and lust, the mind is liberated and said to be well liberated. That means rebirth is ended. So this is how we delve with the knife, arousing energy and applying wisdom to throw out the piece of meat. So abandoning any desire to be reborn after death, because rebirth is suffering and no rebirth is happiness. That's our supreme happiness, our goal of ultimate safety. And so then the final part of the riddle refers to the Naga serpent, Nago in Pali. And if you remember, the riddle says, delving with the knife, the wise one saw a Naga serpent. A Naga serpent, O venerable sir, thus spoke the Brahmin, leave the Naga serpent, do not harm the Naga serpent, honor the Naga serpent. And the Buddha explained this by saying, the Naga serpent is a symbol for a bhikkhu who has destroyed the taints. So kinasava in Pali. Leave the Naga serpent, do not harm the Naga serpent, honor the Naga serpent. This is the meaning. So the Naga serpent has been used as a symbol for an arahant, the one who has destroyed the taint. And this reference to Naga serpent in this way as an arahant has also been used in different parts of the Sutta Pitaka. So if you read the verses or the legends of senior bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, they also refer to arahants as Naga serpents. And of course, there are different meanings applied in the suttas, and don't get it confused with the realm of the Nagas. That is something completely different. So this is just used in a symbolic sense. Now, if we understand how to contemplate this riddle and penetrate the Dhamma contained in this riddle, then we realize Nibbana, just as Venerable Kumārakassapa was able to. So this is why we honor all the arahants. We pay respects to them, all the perfected ones who are taintless, having destroyed the taints by following the Buddha's teachings. And we're no longer bound to samsara and this whole mass of suffering. But when you look at it this way, it's very hard to see how other beings, other people are able to attain Nibbana without these instructions. It's just, how would you do it? How would you know? And so we can say sadhu, sadhu, sadhu here. So we can see that this is a very, very powerful sutta meditation. Now, it may seem difficult at first, but it's really putting together other dhammas that we've learned to follow and using it to do this insight or wisdom pathway that the riddle has given us. And as with most of Buddha's teachings, there's an emptying process with what we're doing, emptying of the wrong view, emptying of all the obstructions to the path, so that we can ultimately realize Nibbana, complete liberation from this whole mass of suffering. As with other sutta meditations, if you're keen to gradually develop this meditation, it's possible to become quite skilled at it and to obtain path and fruit. And of course, if one really applies oneself and doesn't have other worldly distractions and things like that, then it would be clear that you could attain to Nibbana. Now, I encourage you to take time to develop this meditation. When you learn a new sutta meditation, it's good to follow the Buddha's learning system. So write down the key steps, make notes, really make notes in order to help you, help with the meditation. Start to memorize parts of the riddle, knowing the sequence of the riddle. So that means knowing that, anthill fuming by night, blazing by day, you delve with a knife throughout the bar, throughout the toad, and so on and so forth, all the way up to the Naga serpent, but also knowing what they represent, and then having written the notes, knowing what you meditate on each step. And then it can also be really good to have a bird's eye picture of the meditation. This means getting an idea about the whole meditation, like what are we progressing through? What is the main gist of the meditation? I find that very helpful when I come across new sutta meditation. So for example, here we can see that as we meditate through the riddle, we are going towards Nibbana. And along the way, what we're doing is to remove each and every obstruction, and it gets more and more refined. And as we go along, we're protecting what we have already developed until there's nothing left except for Nibbana. That's the gist of the meditation. And then it's very good to deep dive into each part. So examine one part at a time, become really familiar with it, become really good at meditating on that part and penetrate the Dhamma in that part. And then when you bring it together, it doesn't seem as daunting, not as overwhelming. And you initially lightly meditate on it, as a whole, and develop a bit of a flow to the meditation. And then as you become skilled, it's like flipping a switch, at each and every step. And when you become really competent, then the insight begins to flow. You get more out of it than maybe even what I've explained. And you get the wisdom from your own meditation. And that wisdom, that insight becomes very definite, definitive for you. And then the meditation becomes less unwieldy or clunky, and you no longer have to try and figure out, what does this mean, or what was this again? And then after you really learned it and the Dhamma becomes embedded, then what happens is you activate it more easily. So your own spiritual faculties get sharpened. And as we all practice and grow in the higher training, so this adisila, adichitta, adipanya, so the higher virtue, concentration of mind and wisdom, also known as sila, samadhi, panya, then the insights will continue to develop and grow. And so the important thing about insights when you develop them in any of these sutta meditations is to make sure that they align with what the Buddha has seen, what the Buddha is saying that you should see. So you know you're on the right track, that you're on the safe path. And so it will ultimately culminate in nibbāna. The key thing here is really to gradually learn and to make sure you stay in the sequence without skipping steps or glossing over. And as you build the sutta meditation step by step, these wholesome perceptions, these kusala sanyas are what arises regarding this Dhamma. And so that is what makes one happy. Joy arises because we're gradually training, gradually understanding, building up our practice. And so we gradually make progress. So what I'll do now is summarize the sutta meditation in a shorter form. So then you get the gist of what we're doing here. And for more elaboration, go back to the talk and see which bits if one does not understand. So the first step is we begin by contemplating the anthill that fumes by night and blazes by day. So this symbolizes the four great elements. And what we want to do here is to contemplate these four great elements. So the earth element, water element, wind element, and fire element, internally and externally as not me and mine. So this is the same meditation that we do in the Dhatu Vibhanga Sutta by taking our own examples and making sure that we have the correct view. And if we have that correct view, then we actually see that we don't want to be fuming by night and blazing by day, because all that is doing, why we do it, is because it's coming from the wrong view. And so that starts to diminish. And particularly in the meditation, you no longer fume by night and blaze by day if you have corrected the view. It's not me and mine. We're not constructing a permanent self out of these four great elements. So by doing this, then we are now delving with the knife, which symbolizes arousing energy and applying wisdom. So we've already done it even in the first step. So that's the first example. And we keep applying the knife throughout, delving with the knife throughout. So we keep applying energy towards applying wisdom for the rest of this meditation. Now, if we succeed at the four great elements as not me and mine, then we're able to throw out the bar. So we come to this third step here. And this symbolizes abandoning ignorance. In this case, it means that we've removed the wrong view, so we're not constructing and perpetuating a permanent sense of self based on a misapprehension of the four great elements. If we have done this meditation correctly, then we've gone beyond form and we attain to the formless. Now, when we do this, we see the toad. So what this actually symbolizes is how we're always associated with anger. We can use the simile of the fruits on a tree from the Potaliya Sutta. And remember that we cannot simply live on the fruits, because when we climb the tree to get the fruit, someone comes along to cut down the tree. So if we live on the gross fruit, sickness comes down to cut us down. Or it could be the aging, it could be death. And if we want to live on the subtle fruit, such as the formless attainments, we'll still fall from them, because even after dwelling there for a long time, it's not completely undisturbed. So for example, we said the minute we think of form, we fall from infinite space or any of the other formless attainment. So we recognize that we need to throw out the toad, which means, in other words, abandon association with anger. And the only way we can do that is to make our goal nibbana, only seek nibbana, take nothing else apart from nibbana, not even higher concentration. And so then we come to the fork, and this symbolizes doubt. So this is the doubt connected with how to develop the Noble Eightfold Path. So it's not the doubt associated with wrong view or associated with taking refuge in the Triple Gem. We're confident in those things in this meditation. But this is the doubt associated with how do I actually practice this? And so to throw it out, we need to ask someone. So we ask the Buddha in this case, who's directing us through the riddle, or we ask in other times, ask someone who actually knows the meaning of the Buddha's teaching and how to practice them. So then we get to the sieve, and this symbolizes the 5 hindrances. So here we need to understand that we're looking at these 5 hindrances at a higher level. We come to this sieve because we're essentially saying we don't want to go backwards and reintroduce unwholesome things back into our meditation that will hinder us or veer us off this wisdom pathway towards nibbana. So if we look at the 5 hindrances, we need to understand that they're linked. And if we can stop them at sensual desire, this is the best outcome, because it becomes a bigger problem if all the 5 hindrances get activated because they nourish ignorance. So to throw out the sieve, we need to apply the Buddha's medicine to abandon the 5 hindrances. So I'll go through all of them, not assuming that we've just simply abandoned sensual desire. And I'll just quickly run through it. So sensual desire. With this hindrance, we need to see the physical nutriment, the 4 great elements, as it actually is, that it's foul, not beautiful. Another way is also to reflect on, these things, these sensual pleasures that we have the wrong intention towards, that they're impermanent, hollow, false, deceptive, and illusory. And we can also reflect that we can't fix our predicament with sensuality. When we contemplate aging, for example, that whatever we're trying to reconstruct with sensual desire, we can't match that pleasure that we had before. It's just not possible. Then with ill will, if we haven't overcome sensual desire, then this arises because we don't understand the harm caused by the form, that it is subject to change, that we can't fix it. Even this body is the same thing, that because we've birthed this body, aging makes ill will arise. And so when we don't understand, when we don't reflect on the Dhamma in the correct way, then we have this ill will. So we don't want to be resting with this sign of the repulsive. So instead of doing that, and instead of blaming something or someone, then it's better to cultivate metta, loving kindness. And so that's the medicine that we apply here. When it comes to the sloth and torpor, we get to this point because the mind is sick and our mental states are also sick. Our feelings and perceptions are sick. And with this sloth and torpor, we need to arouse energy. That's one thing that we can do to overcome it, to remove, any sensual thoughts, ill will thoughts, and harming thoughts. So we actually remove them. We don't allow them to be there. So that takes the effort. And then the other medicine is to develop the perception of light. So when we develop this, the mind becomes luminous. It gets out of the dullness and the gloominess of the mind. It's not covered. And so we start to see what are the sick perceptions that are causing and fueling this sloth and torpor. And what we do is remove them with the perception of light. And then we come to restlessness and worry. So here the mind has become unsettled or disturbed. Remember, this is again at the higher level. So this is what is blocking us from nibbana. So we're going to look at this within that context. So we talked about 2 conditions with regard to restlessness. The first one was the lust-provoking delight. The mind is unsettled because of desire for different things. I should do this thing. No, I should do that thing. But in this case, we need to uplift the mind or maintain it at the higher level of concentration, because in that way, it won't slip and slide. And then the condition is the gratifying faculty, where we're grasping to the higher concentration, which then becomes an obstruction. So what we need to see here is that even at this higher concentration, it's not stable. And so there's an impermanency that is there. And what we need to do is remind ourselves that nibbāna is our greater happiness than what we are experiencing as happiness in the higher concentration. So because if we fall, then we fall back to the toad, which is this association with anger. And that's not what we want to do. We've already overcome that. So the medicine here, again, is to remind ourselves about nibbāna. And then when it comes to the worry or remorse, this is connected with unwholesome things we've done or good things that we haven't been able to fulfill or do. So to overcome the worry, we need to admit our transgression. So we've said this many times before, do it 3 times, ask for forgiveness, admit the transgressions, make sure you disapprove of these past wrongdoing, and make a very strong determination not to do it again. And when it comes to the good things that are unfulfilled, and particularly here we mean the Dhamma path, we need to remember that we've done what we can in the past. We don't worry about those things that weren't fulfilled then. What we need to do now is make the determination to arouse energy and make sure we protect what we've practiced before in order to realize nibbāna. And so that's how we overcome worry. The last one is the doubt. And so this arises again because we think I can fix it with sensual pleasures and things. And so this is what leads us to kick off the rest of the hindrances. And so we need to be very clear that we see the danger in sensual pleasures, in the form, in the physical nutriment, in these things that are comprised out of the anthill. And so this is what we have looked at early on and progressively looked at in this meditation. And so what we're saying here with doubt is we don't want to reintroduce it thinking, I can fix it in this way and I don't need to worry about nibbāna, that there is something that I can still do and control to make this work, make this predicament work. And so what we're saying now is if we thoroughly understand all 5 hindrances, that particularly at the sense pleasure level and coming back to 4 great elements, then we don't want doubt here triggering the taint of ignorance, going back to the taint of sensual pleasure. And so we fully convince ourselves here, no, it is impermanent. It is suffering, not to be taken as me and mine. It is we must not do this. And so that's how you throw out the sieve and abandon the 5 hindrances. So the next one is this tortoise. And so here this symbolizes the 5 aggregates affected by clinging. So we need to use the insight pathway given in the Samadhi Bhavana Sutta. And because we're at the higher level of concentration, and particularly the formless sphere, then we need to look at perception. And so this relates to the perception of infinite space, perception of infinite consciousness, perception of plane of nothing, or the plane of neither perception or non-perception, whichever we have attained. And our mind is uplifted having removed the 5 hindrances. So now we specifically need to look at the arising and passing away of perception. So we contemplate the arising, which is abhinandati, abhivadati, ajosavititati. So do we seek delight, welcome, and remain holding to the perception of, for example, infinite space? And we need to see, delight arises and that conditions clinging. With clinging, that conditions existence. With existence, that conditions birth. If we birth, then that conditions aging and death and the whole mass of suffering. So that's not what we want to do. We see the suffering in that. That is not what we want to do. And so we look at the passing away of perception. So we say, na binandati, na bivadati, na josayatitati. We do not seek delight. We do not welcome. We do not remain holding to the perception of the example that we've used here is infinite space. And therefore, no delight arises. With the cessation of delight, there is a cessation of clinging. And then, of course, it leads again to the cessation of the whole mass of suffering. So we're very clear on that. And that's how we abandon the tortoise or throw out the tortoise. So then the next one we come to is the butcher's knife and block. And this symbolizes the 5 cords of sensual pleasure. So we said here at this point, we chop off all 5 cords of sensual pleasure and we throw out the butcher's knife and block. And this is because what we're saying here is we want the cessation of contact, because with the cessation of contact, that leads to the cessation of feeling. And so again, we go through the paticca samuppada and we know that it leads to ultimately the cessation of the whole mass of suffering. So you can see here at each and every turn, the Buddha is saying, well, you know, if you're going to get duped at this point, let's make sure it's not reintroduced. Let's get rid of it. And so we keep coming back even to dependent origination to know, let's cut this off. Let's not reintroduce it. Let's not do this anymore. And then we come to the piece of meat or flesh. So this one we said symbolizes delight and lust, or this is what the Buddha has said. So this is delight and lust to be reborn after death in very simple terms. So it's the final thing to realize for nibbāna. So here we thoroughly investigate and understand aging. That's one way that we can remove delight and lust. So if we take rebirth, it is the condition for aging. And we're talking about aging that affects the form, so how the body and faculties age, feeling, you know, when we experience change in our feeling, perception, the present existence does not, or present experience does not match what we're trying to replicate from the past. And volitional formations and consciousness, you know, aging that affects whatever we mentally construct, and how there's aging in everything that comes with contact. And so if we fully understand aging, then we can remove any delight and lust to be reborn after death with that wisdom, with that insight, with that knowledge. The other way is to reflect, if it is impermanent, suffering, and subject to change, is it worth taking as me and mine? And so the answer is no. And so if you fully contemplate that and your answer is no, you can move to the next question, which is, if it is not worth taking as me and mine, should we have this delight and lust to be reborn after death? And if you fully contemplated having answered the first question correctly, then your answer would be no. And you're basically saying, why would we want to be reborn to another existence, any kind of sensual form or formless existence that keeps us bound to this whole mass of suffering? So then the final question that we ask is, if we don't have delight and lust to be reborn after death, is it pleasurable or suffering? And so the answer is, of course, it's pleasurable, because no rebirth is pleasurable. It's happiness, as Venerable Sariputta has said, because rebirth is suffering. And so what we're saying, when there's no rebirth, we're saying nibbāna. And so this is how we throw out the piece of meat or flesh and abandon delight and lust. And so by meditating on the riddle in this way, we methodically dismantle everything, every lie that could pull us back into samsara and this whole mess of suffering. So that's the meditation. So we can end our session here. Let's pay our respects to the Buddha and express our gratitude in our mind to the Buddha for this wonderful, wonderful teaching. We can have gratitude to our parents, our teachers, anyone who has helped us up until this point. We can dedicate the merits to any of our departed relatives right now. And we can share the merit with all sentient beings. May all beings be happy and well. May all beings be free from suffering. Blessings of the Triple Gem to all of you. Wishing you well. Eruan Saranai.